The people of God had set out on a journey that the boss told them would only take a few weeks, but it's taken a lot longer than that. In a daring midnight rescue, God had freed the people from their slavery in the land of Egypt and set them on course for a land of promise. Before long, though, somebody cried out from the back seat of the caravan, "Are we there yet?" And Moses said, 5 more minutes. And then the grumbling started. This passage is one of the best all-time biblical examples of the word grumbling. The people cry out to God and to Moses, "Why have you brought us out of slavery just to let us die in this God-forsaken place?" And as for this wilderness nonsense, quote, "There's no food and water, and we detest this miserable food." And Moses says, "But you just said there was no food." And the people are like, "Well, there's food, but we don't like the food." Haha. This is how you know it's grumbling and not about something else. God has given what is needful, but the people of God don't like what God has given and prefer the way that they were doing it before. They liked going out to restaurants. They liked it when their kids, went to school. They liked being allowed to leave their room at the retirement residence. The limited options for food and drink in the wilderness were not due to a tactical error on the part of the planning committee. Rather, the limited options were essential to survival in the wilderness. There are certain journeys where it is not possible to pack enough at the outset to last you through the journey. This is not based on our lack of skill or foresight, but demanded by the circumstances. There are journeys we cannot front load, where there is not luggage big enough to hold everything we're going to need. And so what if we can't pack enough to last us? What do we do when the food and clothing we packed runs out, but the journey's still going? Who will help or hurt us along the way? In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus takes 70 of his disciples and he sends them out on a mission with instructions to pack nothing. And that wasn't because he thought the journey would be over quickly. A really good friend of mine from middle school and high school, Alex, is Chinese American, and later on in life, maybe after university, he went to China for the first time to do an internship there. And I remember when he came back, I asked him what the experience was like, and he summed it up like this. He said in China, people's mentality was just enough. He said back here in the States, the mentality was just in case. Just enough versus just in case. This week marks 1 year of the pandemic, at least in the way that it's hit us here in Toronto. Now, with my visionary Moses-like foresight, I'd instructed our staff way back a year ago to make sure they packed enough office supplies for 3 weeks because, you just got to be on the safe side and get ahead of this thing. You don't know how long this pandemic's going to go on for. But in learning to follow Jesus Christ, the real radical reorientation gets underway when you realize you cannot return to base camp every 7 days. You can't go back to the church building for your preaching notes or your pew or your prayer book. With just in case Christianity, we can have the smorgasbord at our fingertips. Everything we could possibly want packed away in the storage locker. With just enough Christianity, the smorgasbord will literally kill us, because we cannot bring the storage locker with us into the wilderness. We can't make the journey that way. And what's more, with the storage locker there, we can easily forget what was important to hold on to in the first place. And if we haven't learned the other skills for finding and following God, we're going to find the wilderness really tough. In the long history of following God, maybe it's the buildings that are actually the exception and not the norm. Judaism had to learn this a long time ago, back around Jesus' day when the temple was destroyed. Judaism had to undergo literally this radical retooling of its whole faith. And they had to say, how are we going to worship God if we've got no place to go to worship God? And thus emerged, among other things, the genius of Judaism in its practices for how you keep God in mind in the midst of being scattered throughout the world. The famous and arguably most effective of these being the Sabbath, in which Jews recognized once a week, I'm not a slave anymore, so why am I still living like one? If you and I are going to learn to follow Jesus in this post-pandemic age and beyond, a radical retooling is called for. Because in many ways, as a people, we've forgotten some of those skills. I'm talking church as wilderness survival skills. This is the trajectory we've set upon for our Tuesday courses that we offer throughout the year, that right now we're calling OMG Tuesdays. These are not curated trips to ye old curiosity shop. But here's how to start a fire when it's raining. Here's how to make shelter. Here's how to prepare food. Here's how to bandage wounds. Or, to put it another way, here's how to pray. Here's how to read the Bible. Here's how to find a friend to encourage you in the faith. Here's how to enter into somebody's pain without trying to solve it. If you want an example in the history of the following Jesus movement, go look up the Jesuits, because they were sent on missions far away from any church and any building, and sometimes even a community. And so they went to school for up to 7 years to learn how to create what they called, quote, the monastery within. They had to build the monastery within, the church within, so when they were out there with no church, they still had one to go to, because it was inside them. Back to our story. The actual sting of death is what brings the people to their senses. Maybe the pandemic will do the same for us. Okay, people are actually dying here. What do we do? And they say to Moses, go before God in prayer. And what emerges is one of the weirdest action items anywhere in the scriptures. Okay, so I want you to cast a snake out of bronze, put it up on a stick, and tell people to look at it. What is that thing, more than anything else in the world, that you do not want to face or do or think about? It might be a situation, a person, a memory. Whatever it is, to look it squarely in the eye feels like certain death to you. Staring at the very thing that could kill you and turn you to dust and ashes, or at least it feels like it. Maybe that is what we fear most about following God in the wilderness when there's nothing else to protect us. And perhaps with that thing or person or situation you've called to mind, perhaps God has shown you your very next step on your journey to freedom. For me personally, this past week, that meant going to make an apology to somebody. The thing that feels like death, but which leads to life. This past week, I officiated at a service of prayer just prior to the cremation of a longtime faithful parishioner. And a few people said a few words, and I led us in prayer and a little bit of remembrance, and then we came to that fateful moment at the end where we, those of us who were gathered, were going to watch the coffin make its way into the flames. Who can face that alone? And in this amazing moment, the funeral director said it was time when they were ready to come press the button to open the door and to start the process. And the three kids together in this moment each shook one another's hand. And the one in the front went and pressed the button with everyone else holding on. And if you're listening or watching this sermon and you don't know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the book of Daniel, go Google Daniel, fire, son of man, and you'll find it. Because there were three people in an ancient culture that was contrary to their God. And when they were following the God, they were told, if you keep following that God, we're throwing you in the fire. And they kept following the God, and so they threw him in the fire. And all the people around watching looked into the fire, and the three were holding hands, and then someone shouted out from the back, but look, there's a fourth person in there, and it looks like the Son of Man. And those of us who follow Jesus understand that Jesus was with them in the fire as he is with us. And referencing this exact passage from Numbers today, Jesus himself declares in John's Gospel, as Moses lifted up the snake in the desert, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, so that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him. And Jesus says to us listening this morning, I know you are afraid. I know the journey is too much and too long. I know you're tempted to turn back. And I know the way forward seems blocked by something as solid as bronze. But look up. For the way to that land of milk and honey is not back or under or around, but through and in. Through fire and death and the cross and every single thing we are afraid of, led by the one whose perfect love casts out fear. And Jesus says to us, hold my hand and let's go.
Over the skyline to see the spheres, I lift my eyes to the heavens. Nothing sensible has yet appeared in this irrational season, but the light is wide. Out on the